So I thought, well, that's just stupid, and it is.
I want to come to the efficacy of torture or otherwise, but just the backdrop before you're surged into this place to interrogate the man who is the subject of this book largely. Prior to 9/11, Al-Qaeda had blown up US embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, and they'd planned to blow up Times Square in New York. There'd also been the suicide bombings in Lebanon that you alluded to. How certain were you that Islamic radicals in general, or Al-Qaeda in particular, were planning attacks on America prior to 9/11?
Oh, completely certain. There's no doubt, and it's a fact that the agency and the U.S. government, but the agency is the lead agency for counterterrorism, was seized with the threat from Al-Qaeda from the mid-1990s on. And it was real. You talked about the embassy bombings in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. There was another, they succeeded there in doing that. They also attempted to blow up our embassy in Tirana, Albania, but we stopped them for that. That didn't receive much press because the bomb didn't go up. There was what was called the Millennium Plot, another one that you didn't allude to. There are any number. The Millennium Plot was a plot to blow up a car bomb, essentially in Times Square at midnight on the year 2000. And I was very minorly, tangentially involved in that. That was a very good operation done primarily by the FBI with the help of the Canadian service and then tangential help by the CIA. And we stopped that. So George Tenet, the head of the CIA, has said publicly many times, all of the lights were flashing red, and the CIA, tried to warn the Bush administration that they were coming after us. There were real plots, and they would happen. That's all true. So we knew what the danger was, certainly.
And after 9/11, were you seized with the same kind of zeal, perhaps, that your colleagues were, that the entire nation was, in terms of, we must avenge this? What was your personal response?
Yeah, I don't know if vengeance is part of my constitution, but certainly anger and strong desire to find and stop the people who had done it. Absolutely, yeah, definitely, that's certainly true.
And so the following year, you're seconded to what is effectively the most important assignment of your career. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, 2002, almost precisely a year after the attacks of 9/11, I was at headquarters, and I was working on not a terrorist-related operation at the time. And it was a beautiful day, just like 9/11 was. Indian summer is very pretty. And the beginning of the day was 9:10, 9:15. I'm sitting at my desk, and my boss came to my office, which was highly unusual. He never came back to the office. And he's one of the top half dozen, debatable by definitions, but a very, very senior officer in the CIA. So he came back and poked his head in my office and said, "Glenn, good morning." I thought, oh, clearly something is up. So, good morning. He said, I'm not allowed to say, for foolish reasons, what language I speak in the book, but one can work out what my languages are. One can ask me what I speak, and I can answer that. It's
You speak
true.
Arabic fluently?
I do not speak Arabic, no.
You speak French fluently?
I do speak French fluently.
You speak Spanish?
I speak Spanish,
You
yes.
speak Portuguese?
I understand Portuguese.
German?
Ein bisschen. Yeah.
Any others I've missed?
Pig Latin. That's it for language. I shouldn't be flippant. This is not a funny subject, I'm sorry.
So they were coming to you on the strength of your linguistic skills, though, partly.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll get to why they chose, or if not chose, came to me. So he said, good morning, and he said, how's your language? It's very good. He said, listen, I need you to go tomorrow on a business trip overseas. These are verbatim quotes, and he said, it's important for you, it's important for the CIA, and it is important for the country. Will you do it? And well, this is why you take the oath. This is what you hope for, something consequential. And it was obvious to me it would be terrorist-related, given what the agency was focusing on at the time. So I said, let me talk to my wife. She had been gravely, almost mortally ill. She had almost died and was just convalescing. He said, fine, call her, you have 1 hour. And so I called my wife immediately, and I repeated it, and she said, well, look, put this way, obviously you're going to do it. I will cope. We'll work it out. So that took 3 minutes. This is true. And so I didn't want to appear overeager. So for the next 56 minutes, I went and bought a coffee, and I walked around, I chatted with colleagues and stuff. And then on the 59th minute, I poked my head in my boss's office, and I said, Rob. And he looked up. I said, it's a go. And he said, fine. Go talk to John. He's waiting for you in the Counterterrorism Center. He'll fill you in. So I walked across headquarters. It's literally a 10-minute walk. It's a half mile. It's a huge building, series of buildings. And I knew John professionally a bit. And he said, Glenn, I've been expecting you. Come in and close the door. And in the agency, that's a significant step. It seems inconsequential, but it's not. We work on clandestine issues, that is true, but it's a very collegial atmosphere. You only close the door for 2 reasons. One, there's a personnel issue. Mary is sleeping with Bob, or Jack is stealing from the till, or something like that. Or Mary and Jack are stealing, so on. Or there's a very sensitive operation. And so that's what it was. And he said, we have rendered, which meant in this instance, kidnapped off of a street in the Middle East. He told me who he was, and I'm not allowed to say. One of the top 5, 6 officers in the Al-Qaeda hierarchy, a really big fish. We believe he can lead us to Osama bin Laden. At the least, he has information that will allow us to destroy Al-Qaeda as a functional institution. The interrogation is not going well, and we want you involved. Now, why? When you look at the Venn diagram of what was needed, the interrogation is not going well. So they needed the most experienced operations officer available. At that time, I had nearly 20 years' experience. That's an unusual thing. There are not a lot of... I wasn't the most senior officer by any means, but I was a 20-year veteran, and there aren't a lot of those. They needed somebody who spoke really outstanding, undefined, unspecified language.
French, Arabic, Spanish.
And they needed someone who was available. So when you look at that Venn diagram, the subset was me. That was it.
And did they give you instructions?
They did. John, the fellow, said, Glenn, talk to my deputy. He'll give you your operational instructions and tell you what we're expecting of you. And so I found him after a couple of hours. And he became, for the next 3 months, I was the field, I led the interrogation team in the field. And the fellow I'm now going to describe became my counterpart at headquarters, who ran the operation from headquarters. That's how things always go. And there's a field and a headquarters chief. So he and I worked intimately together, although electronically, by telegrams, and were consistently, from the get-go, at odds. So he said the following. It's one of the whole experience, but certainly this conversation I will now relate is one of the incised moments of my life. We all have these moments, where were you when you learned your mother died, or when Kennedy was shot, or something like this. This was one of those moments. I instantaneously was quite conscious that this was the critical moment in my career, then a 20-year career, and I quite consciously thought a critical moment in the history of the CIA and the United States post-World War II. It was obvious it was a big deal. What was the big deal? This is the conversation, just like this. He said, you are now me, I am him. He said, you will do whatever it takes to get this man to talk. Do you understand? And I physically recoiled, because I did understand. And I was stunned. It was the word that came to my mind immediately was, he's telling me we're going to torture this guy. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe that a colleague, an American officer, a CIA officer, would talk about that in the context of his work seriously. It was inconceivable to me. So I said, we don't do that. And his response was, well, we do now. And I thought, holy shit.
And the man was Haji Pasha Wazi, wasn't it? Osama bin Laden's ostensibly...
Journalists are enterprising and often talented, but I can't comment.
You call him Captus in your book, and he was believed to be bin Laden's banker. And he was abducted off the streets of Dubai and rendered to Morocco. Is that right?
I have the same response. I can't. I really may not say.
Do you have a kind of classified and unclassified part of your brain?
The answer to that is yes. Actually, you learn to do that. That's true. But I really am not allowed to. I'm obliged to repeat the bromides of I can't comment on that.
Okay, so let's not call him Pasha Wazi, even though that's who it was and is. It was your job to interrogate this man you call Captus. You've said in your book that you can size someone up, and people in your position can size people up within 1 or 2 minutes of meeting them.
Most of the time, I think.
Just out of interest, a silly question, but when you went to, before we get to that, sizing this man up, when you went to Morocco, did you have a visa? It's a silly question. You probably didn't have a visa, did you? You don't need a visa.
I don't know if one needs a visa to go to certain countries.
The CIA doesn't need visas, do they?
That I can answer, and that's not true. No, we are subject to all the obligations that everybody is, unless we're doing something really spooky, which we do sometimes. But generally speaking, we have to play by, obey all the laws and the rules. I can't say and don't recall. I'm not being facetious.
Okay, so you end up in Morocco, or this unnamed country, and you meet Haji Pasha Wazi, or Captus, and you say that you can size someone up within a minute or two of who they are.
Pretty much.
What's your first impression of this man?
Well, yeah, the two things aren't necessarily the same. I certainly can give my first impression of the man. Then I'll try to size up what I thought. I'm not sure they're the same in this instance. But, this man was in a terrible fix. He had been kidnapped, which meant that he had been approached from behind by a number of burly men, had a leather sack thrown over his head, was bodily restrained, tossed into a car, and driven away while being subdued for a long, long time, and then showed up someplace. So he didn't know who, what, where, when, why, anything. But he knew he was in a bad fix. So he was... no one would behave normally in that circumstance, and he was afraid and trying to measure how he should behave so that he would not get in an even worse fix. So I found him terrified, cooperative, how to articulate it? He was not an aggressive personality, even given the circumstances. He was not there was not a lot of testosterone or anger or defiance in his personality or in his demeanor at that moment at all. He was what appeared to be a middle-aged man who was really scared, but who was trying to keep it together, stay emotionally controlled, and be responsive. Now, my assessment of him, what you quoted me as saying, I do believe, but at that instant or in that moment, I did not really attempt to have a thumbnail conclusion or assessment of the guy. I took as I assumed to be accurate the assessments of him provided to me by my colleagues who had spent thousands of man-hours working on this man's case, on his life. My colleagues knew everything about this man, so it was very impressive and compelling. And I know my colleagues to be honorable and hardworking and to check their conclusions. And the assessment was, this is a big fish. He's a really bad guy. we really need him. He can provide all of the things I said. One, of course, will accept that as the case at first. Progressively, I found that not to be the case.